Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
The Ringo All-Star Band.
The Greek Theater one from 19?
Well, it was in 1995. And I said,
95,
that looks like Mark Farner.
Yeah, 95 was Farner's.
It was, yeah. Because I saw the credits and I didn't know he did that.
Oh, yeah. That's how I connected with him. My first book had a chapter on him because of the All-Star Band, and then he saw that book and got a hold of me and his people and said, we really like what you did in the chapter on Mark. Would you be interested in doing his authorized biography? And
Serendipity. Right, if that wouldn't have happened, you wouldn't have written the book. And
yeah. It's all serendipity. That whole book is really a tale in serendipity. Absolutely, it is.
I think anything when you're doing that kind of a creative endeavor, it's just going to be things that'll happen that'll lead to something else, and it's so unexpected.
It's like dominoes.
Yeah, it's funny.
It's true.
We're back here at Studio 163. We're already involved into the big talk tonight. We're bringing back our first time bringing back a guest here, author Kristofer Engelhardt, and we wanted to bring Kris in. He's officially released and updated his Beatles Fully Uncovered book once again, and we are just happy to have him here to explain all the new stories that he can fill to backfill this Beatles book of bringing in all the sessions they've been on that some of them they forgot about as well. And Kris kind of mentioned it in our first episode. If you haven't heard the first one with Kris, please go back and check that. He was leading up to this book here, and we are coming in 2 days after Jeff Beck passed, and here in January, and Kris has had the book out already for a good month and a half.
It had been out, was released September 19th.
September.
Yes. So it's been out about 3-4 months, but I wanted to thank you for the invite. My pleasure to be here.
Well, I know that we've talked about getting it back going again, and due to schedules and previous, bookings and stuff, we're finally able to get you in the studio to discuss the finale here. Kris also delivered us an extensive list to pick at tonight, and we're going to have Kris and the guys talk about it, but I want to introduce everybody once again. Dr. J's in the house. How you doing, Doc? Back from vacation?
Doing real well.
Yeah. Everything good in Jersey?
Yes, indeed.
All right. Sir Fred's in the house.
Doing good.
Doing good. Looking good. It's a new year. Mike Beatty. Mr. Mike, what's going on? You feeling all right?
I'm feeling good.
You made it. Your eyes are open tonight. This is good. He's alive.
I had like a croup kind of thing last couple days.
Is that a band? No, I'm just kidding. So is that a band? You're out there recording all of them. That's a new band called Croup.
Yeah. That's cool. Band name.
There it is.
But Kris, how you been, man?
Been very good. Been busy. The book has been doing well, getting 5 stars across the board on reviews. Been selling actually more in Europe than in the States. Had huge demand in Germany, Great Britain, and Italy.
Now, when you say the 5-star reviews, it's based on this book alone. Does your back catalog of the previous 2 versions of this book still sell, or are those out of print?
Believe it or not, I just sold my last copy today of Beatles Deeper Undercover, which was the second book, which was the follow-up to the first book. I have 2 copies left of the first book, and I still sell a few of those. I've been selling more recently because of the new book.
Yeah.
So people either want their other copy was worn out, or they want to have all 3, or they didn't know about the other 2.
Amazing.
But really, all you need is the new one. The new one has everything that's in the first 2.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the first 2, not to worry. The new one has all the info.
I want to hit you right off the bat with a question. In the day and age of now, I mean, granted, I've known you since the 90s, as the internet was starting and all this stuff. Is there more of a drive for you to put this in print rather than use a blog for yourself to update things, or how do you see it? And then the only reason I'm asking is I'm looking at some of these former authors of other books, like Lewis Porter, who did the John Coltrane Love Supreme book. He prefers to blog all the extra stuff he's come up with over the years with links and updates there rather than rewrite the book. And he sends everybody back to buy that first book and then go to the blogs. What is your drive behind the whole thing?
Well, I'm very old school, as you can tell by a quick glance. I'm 71. I'm still very much trained in typing, writing, physical print, holding a book. I get the blog thing, but that certainly is the trend. There are less and less publishers, there are less and less newspapers, less and less magazines. Print media, sadly, seems to be headed the way of the dinosaur, which I think is very sad. But on the other hand, it is what it is. Those are the times, and more and more and more it's Kindle, and more it's audiobooks and blogs and so forth, and podcasts, to get your message out. But
is your book? Can you get your book on Kindle?
The last one was, I really don't know if it is available on Kindle or not. And to be perfectly honest with you, while I hope it is, again, I discourage that in my head, because I just like the idea of having a physical. It's kind of like LPs versus download. I hate it. I'm sorry. I hate download. I even hate CDs for that reason. Nothing greater. This gentleman here brought in an album that he actually got from me years ago. It still has my name in it. It's an old Frank Zappa album. And you look at those graphics and you look at the artwork and the physical thing of it, and the
artwork, especially on LPs. I really
the
miss
liner
that.
notes that you can actually read without having to have a friggin' magnifying glass.
Of course, the problem is that most of those vinyl releases had very little information. That was of course, it's too late now, but
there's more information maybe now, but it's presented in a way that isn't in a physical form. You download something and then you print off a booklet if it's available, and it's just not the
PDF
same.
file.
Yeah, it's just, for me, I don't like it. But that's because I'm old, antiquated, and ready for the grave.
Growing up as a kid in the 70s, having the liner notes
60s,
to read
50s.
for you. Well, yeah, but me, it's like, I love the liner notes,
Me
pictures,
too.
Yes albums that you opened up, and you had imagery, and you could find out who was doing what on what track and who produced it. And that got me into who's the record company, who's the executive producer.
Well, that's what was the impetus for my books. That's really what my books are about, is all those details, all those liner notes, producers, engineers, musicians, songwriters.
You used to have the best Beatles collection, and we talked about how it depleted as you sold it off over the years. Do you still have any? I mean, I probably asked you that in the last show, but do you have anything left that you hold on to from your original collection?
I have all the music, and I have everything that's autographed.
You kept all your autograph stuff,
Yeah. All the vinyl.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Was that the impetus, staring at that in the hallways and the rooms full of 45s and vinyl, to say I need to go see what other things are on originally?
No, I'll tell you where that came from. After the Beatles broke up, and this is a story that's oft repeated, and I'm asked often by other Beatle experts because they kind of know this story. But after the Beatles broke up, it was kind of a blessing and a curse. We'd lost the Beatles as a group, but we'd gained 4 times as much music because you had 4 individuals now out competing with one another in the marketplace and doing, instead of having 1 or maybe 2 Beatle albums a year, you now had 1 John Lennon album a year, 1 Paul McCartney album a year, 1 Ringo Starr album a year, and 1 George Harrison album a year.
Yeah, but you don't have the magic.
You don't have the magic,
of the 4
but
of
you
them.
did have the music.
You do, but it's still,
But
it lacks.
Here was the added bonus.
In my mind.
Here was the added bonus to that. While they were also doing their music for their solo careers, they were doing side projects. for initially for Apple Records, because they had these artists signed to their record label Apple. They had Doris Troy, they had James Taylor, they had Badfinger, they had Jackie Lomax, they had Billy Preston. They had all these wonderful, talented people, and each one of those people were assigned a Beatle to basically oversee the project. So if you had Jackie Lomax or Doris Troy, you had George Harrison, or Billy Preston, you had George Harrison producing, helping write songs, playing guitar on. And as a result, there were two individuals, both out of the Chicago area, by the name of Walter Podrazik and Harry Castleman, who wrote a book that was published by a Michigan publisher out of Ann Arbor, Pierian Press, in the mid-'70s, called All Together Now. And that book was a discography. It was really the first well-researched discography on the Beatles' U.S. and British releases. Not only the Beatles, but the solo stuff. In addition to that, they included all of the session work. And a lot of that session work was done under pseudonyms for contractual reasons. So, because they really couldn't be credited. So these two guys really kind of exposed all of these hitherto unknown Beatle contributions to these other artists' recordings. And that was the inspiration for me. I said, wow, not only do we now have 4 times as many records to collect with the 4 individual Beatles recording, but we have all these side projects that they're working on with James Taylor or Badfinger or Mary Hopkin or Yoko Ono, whatever the case might be. Right. So as a result of that, I started to collect all these records and suddenly discovered, hey, there's some great music here. Not all of it, but there's Paul's bass, there's Paul's backing vocal, there's Paul's composition, there's George's brilliant slide guitar, there's Ringo's iconic drums. So that was the impetus that was the real inspiration for the project, those 2 authors. And most of the people that are really into the subject of my book, especially from my generation, if I say Castleman, Podrazik, or All Together Now, they immediately know what I'm talking about, because they too were inspired by that book. And those are the ones, to this day, people that are my age that buy my books, they go, yeah, I remember Castleman and Podrazik. That was the book that got me going. I said, me too, I got to confess.
Wow. I'm glad we got to
all credit due
peel
to
that
those
onion
guys.
off today.
Yeah.
I never did ask that on the first time.
Yeah.
Quick question, because of the conflicts over the last few days, the Beatles ever perform with Jeff Beck?
No.
Not that you know of?
No.
Or record?
No, I don't believe so. No, okay. My mind kind of raced over that, but he's nowhere mentioned in the book. I mean, they cross paths, certainly,
Yeah.
But actual, well, I take that back. There is one example. When the Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 88, they had this assembled crew, the after the show jam that they always do. And Jeff Beck was a part of that jam that included Dylan and the Beach Boys and the Beatles and the Supremes.
The Rolling Stones were.
And that was a different year, though. But that was a later year, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no. Yeah, yes, the Stones were there. Yes, they were there.
Wow.
Yeah. So you had this all-star lineup of all these people, and Jeff Beck was there too.
So there's a little recording, but it was a festivity thing.
Well, yeah, it was the ending jam, and there's video of that, of Jeff playing guitar along with John Fogerty and George Harrison.
The supergroup of supergroups.
Supergroup of supergroups. Yeah, if you actually go down the list, and they're all listed in my book, there's like 45 or 50 people up on that stage. Some of the biggest names in rock and roll.
When you ended this recent revision of book 3 here, what was the high point of the new knowledge? What was the epicenter story?
The Destiny story with 2 guys that had done the music for the video game Destiny, Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. And these two guys had worked for Bungie, and they collaborated with McCartney for the music for the video game. And it's a fascinating story. The twists and turns, the backroom dealings, the politics involved, how gracious and great McCartney was to both of those composers, how they learned to trust each other and work together. And then the whole project at the end basically got scotched by Bungie and Deep Sixth, and it never really officially got it got released posthumously, but never initially. And that's a fascinating story. There's another story about a guy who is a musician who was working at a Hilton hotel in the Maldives Islands, and he was kind of guest services, but he also played his guitar at night to serenade the guests. And one night at the front row was Paul McCartney, and he went out diving with Paul and shot a DVD video with Paul, he and Paul diving together, and they ended up writing the music to accompany the DVD, and they performed together in front of the guests at the hotel. That's a wonderful story. And then Paul signed him to his MPL label, and then Paul contributed some bass playing to some of his recordings on his album that was published by MPL. Talk about serendipity. Mm-hmm. Talk about, just what are the odds of something like that happening.
You told us that story. I think you may have just gotten into that when Fred and I interviewed a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But that's one of them ones that's unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's a great story to read. And there's a lot of them in there like that. There was a woman, she was a soap opera actress in Mexico, very popular in Mexico and in Spain, Daniela Romo, and she was a huge Beatle fan as a kid. But she didn't speak much English, and she was signed to Capitol in the States. And she went to them and she said, "You know what?" She said, "Paul McCartney signed to Capitol, and I'm signed to Capitol, and can't you get me a song from Paul McCartney?" And she said, they looked at me like I was nuts. And she said, "Well, if you won't write them, I will." So she got the help of some of her friends, and she put together her bio in English with some photos and some tapes of her music, and she sent them to MPL in London. And lo and behold, Paul McCartney got back to her and sent her a tape and said, "Here's a song, exclusive for her to release first." He'd written and recorded it years earlier, but for a film soundtrack, but it got scotched and the deal never got used. So he sent her the song, and she re-recorded it in Spanish, had to change the lyrics because they didn't fit the tempo, the cadence of the melody. So, and then Paul invited her to one of his shows, and she got to meet him and presented him with the CD.
Nice.
And she said they were wonderful people. And then she had breast cancer, as did Linda McCartney. So that was another bonding moment for them. They kept in touch about that and were very active in charities for breast cancer. So those are the kind of stories that I love, because they're personal without being personal.
Yeah. They're not over the top.
They're not like, I want to know what drugs you did.
Yeah.
None of that. This is like bonding with people on an artistic level.
Beautiful. Wow. You guys want to hit any of those touch points that
one of my favorite Apple bands was Badfinger. Did you? I think is there one surviving member yet?
One surviving member, Joey Mullen.
Yeah. Did he have any additional information? Were you able to contact him?
Oh yeah, I actually was. Joey and Mike Gibbons, when he was alive, contacted them both. Joey, I believe at the time, was somewhere up in the Minneapolis area, and Mike Gibbons, I believe, was down in Florida then. But and I got great stories, needless to say. But most of my time with them was trying to nitpick and figure out what tracks Paul played on, which ones he produced, which ones he mixed. So it was more technical info and data, because their story was pretty well told.
Yeah.
Although they most certainly got screwed over by Alan Klein, like many of the artists at Apple did. They basically, once Klein came in, they were just tossed to the side, and ended up signing with Warner Brothers and leaving the label, as did
Yeah,
James
kind of
Taylor.
ended badly there.
Yeah.
Well, they made some great albums.
Oh,
I always liked the one Straight Up.
Great album.
Yeah, that was
No
the one
Dice
with
and Straight Up.
George Harrison and
Todd Rundgren.
Rundgren produced that.
Yeah.
A lot of great songs on that album.
Two phenomenal records
Yeah.
back
Yeah.
to back there.
And the first one, the Magic Christian album, which McCartney really, and before that they were called the Ivies, and they had a limited release album under the name the Ivies, which basically was repackaged with a new name and a new title, which became Badfinger and Magic Christian. But McCartney was initially the primary guy in charge of that band, and added a lot in terms of playing piano, playing bass, singing backing vocals, producing tracks, remixing tracks.
Yeah,
so,
giving them that first hit.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
that
come
was-
and get it. Yeah,
Man.
yeah. So, yeah.
What a great
Which was
tune.
about Apple and losing all the money at Apple. So, yeah, which fit with the film, the Magic Christian. About Come and Get It. If you've ever seen the Peter Sellers film, this is a wonderful film where he's giving money away.
I'll have to check that out.
Well, yeah,
Never got to see
if you've
that.
never seen the Magic Christian, it's a marvelous film. It ends the end where he has this big vat outside filled with sewage, raw sewage, and he throws all these. Has a truck pull up and dump tons of British pounds of British currency in the raw sewage, and people are diving into it to get. That's where the song "Come and Get It" and the film.
If you want it,
Here it is, come and get it, and everybody's diving into this cesspool of raw sewage to get the money. But it was really originally written about, all the money that was going out the door at Apple, like what was it, the All You Need Is Cash, the
Ruddles.
yeah.
Classic stuff there. Have you got into the Giles Martin's his remixes, like for example of Revolver?
Oh yeah, I just you can argue it a million different ways, but my take on all that is like, what, we've got all the older mixes. What's wrong with another new approach to another new mix? And with the technology being what it is today and being able to noise reduce in a really effective way without, compromising the original highs and lows and sound of the music, I think it's great. I think he's done a wonderful job. I mean, you can always nitpick, but if you don't like the job he did, go back and listen to the earlier
Well,
mixes.
he didn't really change anything. He just brought a few things out a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I guess Peter Jackson invented this technology.
Yes, which is,
That they were able to go back to the older types of recording and pull individual instruments out.
yes,
Pretty incredible.
and that has opened up a whole can of worms because they're now going to be doing the next on the slate is Rubber Soul.
Rubber Soul, yes.
And then they're probably going to go backwards. And so you're going to go all the way back to Please Please Me and be able to separate, which were just 2-track, basically, back then.
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were, 2-track, and then they would bounce down and mix, one track to the other track and then open up that track. But it was basically 2-track and then 4-track. So they have the opportunity now with this technology and pure true noise reduction, and I'm hoping they'll do Live at the Star Club. I'm hoping they'll do some of the older material that suffers greatly because of the poor recording quality, that they'll really be able to clean these up and give us a whole new window on just how wonderful.
Yeah, the
these
Star
recordings
Club
were.
would be an interesting one to hear.
God, yes, it would. Absolutely.
Right at the very beginning. let's say,
And
where it
really
came
one of their
together.
best live shows. But it's so muddled and but with that technology to be able to. So I'm all for, to answer your question, I'm all for what George Martin's son is doing, and he has the approval of the band or the surviving members. Olivia and Paul and Ringo and Yoko are on board with this, and Paul Hicks has done some things for George Harrison. He's taken some hits on some of that, But again, I mean, it was Bobby Whitlock who came out when All Things Must Pass came out and said, it's terrible, it's rubbish, it's not true to the original idea. But you have to remember, George Harrison was always a little bit miffed about Phil Spector's heavy wall of sound production on All Things Must Pass. And George stated on many occasions after the fact that he wished that album wasn't so Phil Spector-y.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were some songs that just didn't work at all with the wall of sound.
Yeah. Yeah, and so George was saying, well, I wish in retrospect it is what it is and it's there, and you can always go back and pull out the original mix. But George wanted that album to be a little... So when he died, his son Donnie got together with Paul Hicks and some other people and said, let's try to remix this album the way I think my father... And therein lies the controversial word, what I think. So obviously it's some speculation on the part of his son and Paul Hicks, and they took a real hit for it. For me, I can listen to both versions. I can listen to the Phil Spector version, the Phil Spector mix, which is loud and Phil Spector, wall of sound, and I can listen to the more muted, more subtle version that Paul Hicks did with Donnie, and enjoy them both for what they are and say, well, you know what? Here they are. You have A and you have B. And you can like A and hate B, or hate A and like B. Mm-hmm. But they're both there for your enjoyment.
That's my
it's just
all-time
like
favorite album.
Listening to outtakes.
Yeah.
That's listening to different versions of it. I mean, it's interesting to hear.
Right.
For me, I watched Bobby Whitlock because I wanted to see what he had to say on it. And I had my own opinion because I had it the day it came out. That's my favorite record of all time. I've got every version of every load of every kind.
Yeah, I agree.
And it was very brown, warm, almost too warm. It was like, and there's mastering styles nowadays in the digital realm where I'm like, you can go a little hot with the warmth, trying to add something. Because you know how loud the rooms were.
Yeah.
Like horns and stuff on the original. Yeah. And they just brought that whole floor up. And that floor kind of took over. I'm like, they didn't remember to kind of bring back some of the Florentine nuances in it that were in the original. But having said that, I'm like, at least we got someone moving forward with trying something different with it.
You've got two different versions to listen to. Now, remember,
George tried to start doing it because he put out that alternate version just before he died.
Yep.
When they remastered it the first time.
And that was toned down.
Yeah. And that redone version of
Material World?
No, I'm talking about All Things Must Pass, the hit on it.
My Sweet Lord.
My Sweet Lord. Yeah. He did the 2002 version or whatever.
Yeah.
You could hear him pulling out the clarity from the original tapes and adding his new voice on it. And I'm like, well, I know they were heading that way because it was really clear. And now we've got a big varnish put on this without the Phil Spector sound in a sense, with a little bit of the element into it. And I thought, what is this different? Now, if you've got a really good high-end studio recording listening ability, you're probably going to get to hear all, but for your average MP3 player, it's a dark remaster. I mean, it's dark. And Bobby I thought he hit that on the head.
Yeah, and and I've interviewed him many times in the past. Super nice guy. But again, I guess my position is it doesn't really matter because you have both.
Yep. And then we could get another one down the line with just Donnie.
And you probably will.
Yeah. Yep.
Because you're certainly going to get more Beatles remixes here.
You know what I like about like Gary was saying, Revolver, is like we're getting extra takes, we're getting different versions, we're getting different listens into the peeling the onion back of the layers of the tape, of how they put all this on one track and dumped it down, and then they're finding, oh, there's claps on this one. Yeah. We muted them at some point.
Yeah.
And you're getting to hear their process, and to me that's the whole thing.
Yeah, it's education, and I think for me the biggest revelation about the Revolver set was Yellow Submarine. You see a song that started out as a John Lennon demo that sounds like an early version of Strawberry Fields, and McCartney comes in and gives it a melody and then turns it into this sort of marching band, upbeat thing. Lennon started out with this droll, dreary, kind of morose, like I say, like Strawberry Fields. And McCartney comes in and completely changes John's original. The original melody is there, but McCartney turns it into a whole different song. And then you bring Ringo in at the end, and Ringo turns it in to this children's song and this bubbly and the submarine, and it becomes a Ringo song. And that evolution, to me, is the highlight of the Revolver set.
Well, that's that magic
Yeah.
of those guys working together
Yeah.
that's so fascinating.
Yeah.
And, all the great things that they came up with.
Yeah, because
the
if you had
trust in
one,
each
you would
other, too.
only have the John Lennon version,
Right.
or you'd only have the Paul McCartney version.
Yeah,
But when you have
that's
those
also a
three
band's
guys-
trust in one another. Oh, I like what
yeah.
you did.
Yeah.
And then you were watched Get Back, which has come out since we've last talked too, and you're like, this is them just bringing in what they had, and sometimes not agreeing with each other now, and it's
Boy, and there's an album that I still don't think they ever did right, and I've put together my own version of that, and I will challenge anyone to tell me that there's a better mix, or a better, not mix, but a better assemblage of that album than the one I put together. They just, they
What
had
album
Naked,
are you talking
Let
about?
It Be, Get Back, Let It Be,
okay.
Naked.
Yeah.
How many variations of that album did we have? The Glenn Johns mix. We had the Phil Spector mix. We had the Naked mix, which was basically McCartney's mix. And on and on. And then the new thing now that came out. And it's just like, none of those are right. Do a 14-song straight album. Take the best songs from each of those. Naked was as close as they got to realizing what that album, in my opinion, should have been.
I just had that out recently. I thought it's held up really well.
Yeah, Naked
they did
is
a really
good.
nice job with that.
Yeah. That to me is the most listenable of all the variations of that album. But if they would have just stuck to the 14 basic tracks, and not over adulterated them, or they stick to their concept, which was to be alive in the studio, stripped down, no overdubs, no horns or backing vocals or any of that. And Naked achieves that. And but that they never quite nailed that project, in my opinion.
Well, the camera might have
Didn't help.
Yeah, that might have had the major
It had
effect
a
on
lot
this
to
thing.
do with it.
It's different when you've got a camera sitting in your
Absolutely.
face all the time.
Yeah.
I thought that was a major bit of the ending there. It's like, we're going to have this in here and document this. It changes how you breathe, much less how you think.
Well, that was really fun watching that Peter Jackson Get Back.
It was.
yeah.
It was I'm so glad they
gosh.
did it. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. What a treat.
Yeah, it was fabulous.
Did you watch that, Fred?
Yep. Yeah.
Oh,
There's a lot to learn there.
yeah.
I've been watching a number of them lately. There's Paul McCartney's daughter, Mary.
Yeah, the Abbey Road thing. Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it was that one. It's about Paul and her mother, Linda.
Oh,
I watched the Abbey Road thing. It's on Prime, I think.
Yeah, that I haven't seen.
Yeah.
Or
I don't
Paramount.
get
Paramount,
Prime,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, it was a nice Abbey Road, and it's Paul talking to her, and then all the other artists that have been through there, and she brings up Linda a little bit in that, but I haven't seen that one. That you're
No, I'm
talking
not
about.
sure what you're referring to either.
So Abbey
Well,
Road,
it's
is it a
just like-
documentary on the studio?
Yeah,
yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's
okay.
got
It just
Elton
came
John
out
and
just before
all kinds
Christmas.
of people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll check that out.
Yeah,
The one that his daughter did was just about her mother and father.
Yes, I heard that. I didn't know that was out. Honestly, I read about that.
Well,
but
I
didn't
saw it
know.
on YouTube. I don't know what it's called or anything.
She was in the midst of doing both these videos, and
Okay.
the end of this current one with the Abbey Road thing, though, is pretty cool. They got John Williams, the director, orchestra director, Star Wars, and all that, and they're rolling credits on the movie, and all of a sudden Ringo comes up masked up, and he taps him on the shoulder and pulls his mask down, and John Williams, oh my gosh, hello, how are you doing? And Ringo's getting a call from Paul. She's like, here's my dad talking to you, Or not Ringo, but Elton John. It's pretty
Speaking
cool.
of the Mask and Ringo, I got to see Ringo at Soaring Eagle last fall, and that was the last show of the tour, he came down with COVID. Apparently at Mount Pleasant. And that was, they are going to redo the rest of the shows, apparently, but, yeah.
How does he looks so young?
You know, it's ironic because I think most people know this, but he nearly, his nickname, one of his nicknames as a child was Lazarus. He had nearly died on a number of occasions as a young child.
Yes.
Was very sickly, was one of the reasons he didn't get much of an education. He missed a lot of school. He was in and out of hospitals throughout much of his adolescence with pleurisy and appendicitis and tuberculosis and God knows what else. He was a very sickly child. And here he is, the oldest Beatle and the oldest of two surviving Beatles, and is in great shape. He looks not to be a day over 60.
Yeah, he's pretty sprightly.
He works out. There isn't a pound on him. He looks great.
Watched that Paul and Rick Rubin series, and Paul's his voice has dropped, and he's starting to get his jaw. It's kind of Neil Youngish. They're all getting their older feel looking, and they've hit that old age realm.
His
Ringo
voice
has
is,
not.
No, but then Ringo doesn't sing as much or scream as much.
Yeah. He doesn't have 3-hour shows.
Yeah,
he does 2 hours of hits with most of the other
half
people.
The other guys carrying the load. So yeah,
It's a good gig.
it's a good gig. You can get it. Yeah. So and he's having fun doing that. And he's kind of changed things a little bit there because initially the idea was musical chairs. We go out every 3 years and we have a completely new lineup. But he's settled in on this band with a few minor changes. But how are you ever going to get rid of Steve Lukather? I mean, how do you say, well, you know what, Steve, we don't need you this time around.
And Rundgren. I mean, Rundgren's been in and out. He was kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but I mean, you got a guitar player like Steve Lukather, you don't get rid of him.
Yeah. He's got Colin Hay now, too, permanent, seemingly.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, there's A-listers, there's guitar players. Ringo's had the good fortune to have Peter Frampton, Joe Walsh, and Steve Lukather. In my opinion, 3 of the greatest living guitar players on the planet. And those 3 guys, if you saw the Night That Changed America, where they had Lukather, Frampton, and Walsh playing together on stage, talk about the trifecta. I mean, you talk about guitar players, those guys. Ringo's had some guitar players, and I could go down the list, but Steve Lukather is hands down the greatest guitar player that Ringo has ever had, or anyone can ever have. He played with McCartney. If you look at his resume, it's frightening. It's frightening. I mean, you can't name someone that Steve Lukather hasn't played on a recording on, from Michael Jackson to Elton John to name it.
Yeah, right.
I mean, he is such an incredible player, and he loves Ringo, and Ringo loves him. And so he's the core of that band. He, and then Greg Bissonnet, who's from Detroit, who's a phenomenal drummer.
Yeah.
And
Mark Rivera. He's been around the longest,
yeah,
right?
but Mark hasn't actually been with the band for quite a while. He hasn't been with the band since
I didn't even know that.
15 or 16.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay. He was kind of the dude that was always in the
he's
band.
had Warren Ham and filling in that role.
Oh.
And then he had Greg Rowley for a while. But he's down to Edgar Winter, Lukather, Colin Hay.
The bass player from Mr. Mister? Is that the bass player?
He's not with them anymore either.
Okay.
That was
John
Page. Richard Page.
Richard Page.
So he's basically just got that core. Oh, and Hamish Stewart. Hamish is on bass, average white band, and he handles the high parts. And then he's got Steve and Colin and Edgar Winter and Ringo and Greg Bissonnet. And it's a tight band because these guys have been playing. It's a great idea to do those musical chairs every 3 years, but I don't think you end up with as tight a band.
No. I think if you look back at the part, it went from a party band. I mean, you had the band. You had Levon Helm there. You had Dr. John.
Yeah,
You had, and then it got to the Farner era where he started going, oh, okay, here's some cleaner musicians that are not so much partiers, you know. And then he just kind of, you see him vamping, and as COVID hit, and he's really stuck with this band going forward.
But like I say, how do you get rid of a player like Steve Lukather? You never trade him up. Even though he never sang any of those original Toto songs, was never the lead singer on them. He does a phenomenal job handling them. You wouldn't know.
Luke's awesome.
You know, Luke is just amazing. And there's another great chapter in the book, is my Lukather book. I mean, he flat out told me, he said, you're one of the last few journalists I trust in this business. You're one of the few people that's never screwed me over. You've always given me the last word. You've allowed me to see the finished product. And so he's been very open and forthright with me. And it also helps that he occasionally throws a few comp tickets my way for the shows.
Yeah.
Did you get to go see him?
Nice.
Yeah. That's how that all came about.
Yeah.
But,
Did you get to meet Ringo that night?
I didn't that night because of the COVID issue, you know, and so they're kind of strict about that at the moment. But met Steve many a time, and wonderful guy, colorful guy, and amazing talent.
There's a series on YouTube right now of. It was already a movie that Dave Grohl did on that one studio that everybody records in out in
the old it was
Sunset Sound or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, now they're doing Sunset Sessions, and it's a guy that interviews people that have played through there, and they had a big old long Luke episode, and he was a jokester to the whole thing. He had everybody in stitches through the whole thing.
Oh, he's funny as hell.
Yeah, it was awesome. I loved watching that.
Yeah.
You got some new information on the crickets?
Well, that one was actually in the last book, but about the whole thing where they have the vegetarian dinner with McCartney, which I think is hilarious, you know, where they all change what they ordered when Paul and Linda showed up and they realized.
Did the drummer just die?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, like the last
So Joe B. Malden is the last surviving cricket.
Wow.
Have you ever talked to him,
I've
Kris?
talked to Joey B. was the main guy I talked to for the chapter in the book. Yeah, he was the one that told the great story about, you know, we didn't think ordering steaks was such a good idea after Paul and Linda showed up, and we got the lecture about you don't eat anything with eyes.
Yeah, okay.
So they suddenly changed their order at the last minute, so the big steak from the boys from Texas didn't show up on their flight. But they had nothing but, you know, and it's the great thing is I never had to write anything negative. With one or two exceptions of a couple of people in the All-Star band that were a little bit miffed at a few things, by and large, all of these people had nothing but absolutely wonderful experiences working with, you know, their heroes, their idols. And it was a moment of a lifetime for them. Probably just pedestrian, ordinary for the Beatles, unless it was one of their heroes, which in some cases it most certainly was. But I got a great interview from Rodney Crowell, too. He gave me a great interview about working with Ringo, and how he was initially a Beatles fan, and how he'd first seen him at the Houston Coliseum. And I said, well, Rodney, I said, I don't know if you know this or not, but I said, I've got a tape of that performance in pristine quality of the show that you saw them at in '65 at the Houston Coliseum. And he said, really? I said, yeah. I said, I'll send it to you. So he was like overjoyed that I sent him that, because he hadn't heard that tape since he was at that show. Like,
so he was on record with Ringo?
Oh, yeah. He Ringo drums on a couple of songs of his.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you remember, was it one particular album?
Yeah, it's the one he does, the Texas album, where he does all the songs about Texas. And yeah, it was released about maybe 4 years ago. And Ringo drums on one of the tracks on that album. It's a good album, actually.
Yeah,
Really
I'm a
good
fan.
I'm a fan of Rodney too. I don't have that record.
Fun guy to talk to.
Wow.
Real nice, real open, real easy to get on with. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's a new chapter in the book. So
Fantastic.
he talked about how they connected through Bruce Carpenter and was Ringo's videographer, and how they knew each other, and how he'd first met Ringo in London when he was touring England, and they got together and partied one night, and he was playing Ringo all of the old country songs that his dad had taught him, and Ringo wanted to know all these old Texas country songs that
Well, Ringo, big country music
big
fan.
country music fan, and I often thought,
Well, Liverpool, they brought a lot of country music from the U.S. back to Liverpool.
I often told David Fishoff, you should suggest to Ringo that he do a country all-star band.
Yeah.
With country artists.
Right.
I said it would work.
It would.
But
It would have a whole other year of like half the year rockin', half the year country, or whatever. You'd sell it all out.
and a whole different audience.
Yep, completely.
Maybe introduce the kids to some of that classic country music that Ringo liked.
What did he?
Buck
And he
Owens.
also did an album, country.
Yeah,
right?
Buku
Buku
the
of
Blues.
Blues,
Buku
yeah.
Blues, yep,
That was
yep.
a pretty good
In Nashville.
country album.
Recorded it in Nashville. Yeah. Top players.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had the pick of the litter on that. Charlie Daniels and Sneaky Pete and all kinds of people.
Now, you mentioned in your notes that you talked to several of the artists that were signed to Apple that were, I guess, frustrated and, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. A lot of people don't maybe know this, but Apple initially was conceived when Brian Epstein was still alive. And the reason being for a lot of it, the reason being for it was financial and taxes and tax shelters. And but one of the things the Beatles wanted to do was foster young talent, because they had such a difficult time breaking through, and with their songwriting. And so for John and Paul in particular, the first thing they really wanted to do with Apple was set up a publishing company and to hire in songwriters and have staff songwriters, kind of like the Brill Building idea, where you bring these people in and they sit down and they churn out pop songs. And so that's how James Taylor got brought in. That's how a whole number of people got brought in. But some of them, they were signed before Apple had a record label. So even though some of them were songwriters, they also were musicians and performers, and they wanted to get their material recorded and out there. So they signed to other labels like Grapefruit and some of the other artists. And McCartney in particular, being, very pop oriented, and Apple being a business that wanted to make money with song and establish themselves as a song publishing company, wanted hits. And a lot of these artists came in. You got to remember, this is 66, 67, 68. And these guys wanted to do their own thing and write their own songs and record their own albums. And there was a degree of frustration that set in because McCartney, Mary Hopkin being a prime example, she was a Welsh folk singer and she wanted to do Welsh folk songs. And McCartney wanted her to do show songs. Broadway songs, traditional folk music, not Welsh folk music. She actually had written into her contract that for every album she did with Apple, it was to include 2 traditional Welsh folk songs, which Apple, agreed to. But clearly they didn't have a broad international market or appeal like those were the days. That was a huge international hit. And McCartney saw that and he took that and had her sing that song. But McCartney was looking for staff songwriters that could churn out pop hits, that could be singles for other Apple artists on the label. And a lot of these artists were frustrated by that, let's say. And they ended up either leaving Apple Publishing, not re-signing, or frustrated because they couldn't get a recording deal with Apple, or frustrated because they didn't feel they were getting the kind of follow-up support if they signed to a different label to record their music, because Apple still didn't have its own record label.
Well, yeah, but if you produce a hit song, you're going to be making money as a songwriter.
That is correct.
As opposed to putting out your own music that may not sell. And
that's the
you're
way
not doing very
McCartney
much.
saw it. That's the way the Suits saw it. But, these
I
were-
know it's 1969,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
if you took the job to be a songwriter,
Yeah,
that's what
you're there to
should
make
do.
money for the publishing company.
I think
you
you
got to
said
write hits.
something you said that was kind of unique at the start of that. It started when Epstein was alive, and he passed soon after that
Right,
started, right?
right, yeah.
Was there a big change at Apple because of that?
That's so speculative because of the state of mind that Epstein was in at the time, how effective he could have been in managing Apple. But I certainly think he would have kept a much closer eye on the dollars than John, Paul, George, and Ringo did.
True.
Until they brought in Alan Klein. And then by the time Klein came in, he was, I think, essentially working for himself and the Beatles and no one else. But how effective Epstein would have been in managing Apple remains to be seen. The four individual Beatles were the four partners and the four,
But they had all their
offices.
trust in him, all their love. Everything they do to this day is mentioned about how much trust and love they had for that guy. So,
They did, but there were also issues with him at the time too.
yeah.
And he was worried that they weren't going to re-sign him. And there was a lot of frustration they had with him, particularly John and Paul did. How that would have worked out again with Apple is purely speculative.
Right.
But Apple was doomed at the start because you had four highly creative musicians that didn't know, jack what about business. They weren't business people, and they were in shark-filled waters, and they were generous with their time, overly generous with their time, overly generous with their money, and they had some hits and they had a lot of misses. And
True.
the money was going out the front door and out the back door, and up in smoke and down in drink. Left, right, center, and everywhere else. If you saw, like we talked about, the all you need is cash.
Yeah.
The Ruddles, all you need is cash.
So when you finished this book in this realm, what was the final nail in the coffin to say I'm done with this third version?
It's like a painting or a recording. You reach a point where less is more. There are also some publishing considerations. There's also personal considerations. Got to get it done. You try to set yourself a schedule and a goal line. The publishing world has a calendar that's very fixed towards fall, Christmas.
Yeah, holiday.
So you're always pushing to get it out, so, and COVID was great because it was lockdown time. And I thought, well, everybody will be available. It was just the opposite. It was weird. It was harder in many respects than the first two to get people's cooperation. Times have changed. People don't trust journalists. They don't trust the media.
Give us an example of how hard it was to track who down.
It wasn't a matter of tracking him down. It was a matter of him getting to play ball.
Give us an example. Like,
Ooh,
what was something that you had to dig for and finally got
I
their
didn't
trust?
have to dig for him. I would just say, like Ben Harper. Originally, he was on board, wanted to give me an interview. No, I don't want to do it. There were other people, other guys, and a couple of people in the All-Star band that didn't want to. Greg Rowley didn't want to talk to me.
He changed his opinion, but
Richard
didn't he
Page
talk to
didn't
you
want to talk-
originally? Didn't Rowley?
No,
Oh.
not Greg, no. And Richard Page didn't. And I thought, well, why? I mean, Graham Gouldman talked to me, Luke, obviously, all the other guys in the Greg Bissonnet. But some of the guys were just like,
But-
and it wasn't like I didn't get a hold of them. It was just, I had all the connects. I had the management. I had the numbers. I had the emails. I made the pitch and it was just like, and I got more of that this time, even though, and I'm proud to say this, and if somebody wants to challenge me on it, so be it. I had a great working relationship. I didn't have any bad blood with anyone. Never heard back from anyone on any of the books saying, you know what, you screwed me over or you misrepresented me. Never got any of that. But it was like what Luke said to me. He said, well, you know what? He says, I just don't trust anyone anymore.
They're all out for blood, journalists.
Yeah. He says, he said, I've been screwed too many times. I don't want to, it isn't worth the hassle and the risk. He says, I'll talk to you, but you're about the last one.
It's so easy to get your words taken out of context.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Or spin.
Or even, somebody maybe slipping in a word or two that weren't even uttered.
Or what is your agenda? Is your agenda to make a name for yourself as a journalist, or is your agenda to accurately portray what this individual is trying to tell you?
Mm-hmm. Did you eventually pull in Rowley and Page and all
No.
them? Oh, you never did.
No.
So those were they
They
never
just said
happened.
no.
I just wondered what was your one that you worked on and it finally came through and you're like, oh, thankfully they saw the end.
Rodney Crowell took a little bit of prodding to get him to come around, but he did. I mean, a lot of them are very protective of their relationship with Ringo, so they don't want to do anything to jeopardize that.
True. Yeah.
Or it's off the record,
Mm-hmm. How much of that did you get this time around?
More than the other two times combined.
Just because of the situation and state of
It's a different world.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Much harder.
And everybody's getting older too.
Easier to track people down and get a hold of them, harder to get them to play ball. Where in the old days, it was harder to track them down, but once you did, they'd play ball.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. What a turnaround. When did you write that initial book?
The initial book came out in 98. So
how many years did you spend writing that?
The initial book research was at least 4 years. And then in the follow-up books, at least another 2.5 on each of those.
Yeah.
So 5 and 4 is 9.
Yeah. I remember when you did the second book, you and I went down and saw Mason.
Yeah.
I took a photo that's in it.
Yeah.
And you got some stories from Dave Mason, and you were on your track. You were like, this is going to be a good follow-up because I found a lot. And here we are in the third revision. Have you had anybody come to you since then with another thing that you're like, dang, there's more? I mean, I'm sure there's always going to be more, but have you
Well,
had
I went
it happen
back
yet?
to as many people in the book originally.
But I mean, since this has been published, have you got a fourth wheel going on for this?
No.
No?
No, I'm not going to do another one of those.
You're done. Okay.
Yeah. Because it's every 10 years. We have 2 surviving Beatles who are in their 80s. How many more contributions they're likely to do? It's frightening how many they've done in the last 12 years. Far more than I would have ever suspected. I would have figured 30. It ended up being almost 90.
You know, it's fascinating, and I was going to bring this up tonight as a question, I think. They talk about Jeff Beck passing. Beck's done more work in the last 15 years than he did initially, especially through the 80s, and until he came back in the 90s and did a little bit and tested the waters, and all of a sudden he was on a hell bent for playing every year and recording with and getting all the tracks. Are you finding that with Ringo and Paul? They're doing all they can?
Yes. Yeah, particularly Ringo. He seems to drum on everybody's albums now.
Fantastic.
There's probably 30 of the 85 new artists in that book are just Ringo drumming on other different artists' recordings.
Recent too. Most recent.
Yeah, mostly recent.
Yeah.
But again, these two guys are in their 80s now. I'm 71. If the pattern holds true, it'll be 10, 12 years for the next one. That puts me at 80 in my mid 80s and them in their 90s.
Right.
I don't realistically see it happening. And I got to believe they're going to slow down here. So there isn't enough, unless there's at least 35 or 40 or more realistically 50 new artists. A publisher, if there are any publishers 15 years from now or 12 years from now around to do actual physical books rather than blogs as we talked about or whatever. I just... The change between 98 and 2010 was minor. The change between 2010 and 2022 was massive in terms of the way the business works, publishing works, the attitude of the artists, the way information is gathered, the lack of trust or the lack of confidence, and it's a different world.
I also see more back stuff coming out, maybe more Wings secondary stuff, or McCartney solo stuff, or Ringo solo stuff, instead of new material. While Ringo's pumping EP still, but Paul knows where he's at right now.
Well,
like
he's
how
got
the
all
changes
his...
been made. I bet you we start seeing what the Beatles have happening right now to his.
Well, he has been doing that. Yeah. He's had his archive series that he started about, over 10 years now. He's released most of his Wings material in these huge box sets. It's called the Archive Series. And he still has another 10 or 12 albums to issue of the archive material. And we're all like going, hey, Paul, you're doing one or two a year now. It's like one every other year kind of thing. Yeah. None of us are getting any younger, because these archive sets have all kinds of, they're like the Revolver set or the Beatles sets, have all kinds of unreleased material, alternate takes, videos, DVDs, all kinds of books and pamphlets and so forth. I mean, some of them are, 2-3 inches thick. The one he did of Wings in 72 and 73 with Red Rose Speedway, Wildlife, and all the live stuff he did is like 6-8 inches thick. It's a huge set.
Wow.
These are like $300 sets.
Yeah.
But he's still got a dozen of them yet to issue.
Yeah. And that's where my thought process of asking that question is, something's going to spring up in there of another session that was done or with so-and-so, and that another person you might be able to contact down the road, and my gosh, he did work with him, and now you got a relationship or something, It's just those little things as they pop out here over the years, and now those guys are getting into the
last archive set that was released was Flaming Pie, and of course all the Steve Miller worked on that album, so you have the whole Steve Miller angle to that, and there's more stuff that he did with Steve that hasn't been released. So, and
the one with Costello too that came out.
Flowers in the Dirt.
Yeah, that was something else.
Yeah,
I dug that.
So there's more to come, but hurry, we're not getting any younger,
right? Well, thank you, Kris, for all you've given us. Any new Michigan people you've talked to for this book that people might know from our state?
Other than Greg Bissonnet for this book, no. But I would love to do, more on I would love to keep the ball rolling. I would love to keep writing. There was a big name I've been in negotiations with a little bit on and off over the last couple of years from a very big group called America's Band, sometimes referred to as America's Band. And I would love to score that deal. But then again, there's no money in this, unless you're super lucky. It's a lot of work. It's a labor of love. And then the bigger the name, the more challenges there are in terms of legalities, contracts, marketing, expectations on their part.
Well, what about getting that Aerosmith book out first?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
We would love to see that still. That's sitting on the shelf.
So would I.
That might make some of that money that you need to push you into this final one here.
You know what, though? It's sad, but really, book sales, it's people want, I had a journalism professor that told me, this is disturbing, but it's true. He said, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. And unfortunately today, I think most people are far more interested in BS than they are in the truth.
True. I agree with it.
That's why the National Enquirer will probably be the last printed newspaper in America. It'll go after the New York Times.
Everybody likes the dirt.
It'll be the last one to fall.
Yeah.
Because that's, people are, the Harry's book, I'm sure that'll sell.
Yeah.
Like somebody really wants to know.
Well, yeah, that's setting all kinds of records, I guess.
He was on Colbert
What's
the
it
other
called?
night.
Spare?
Yeah.
Well, he's doing a lot of promotion.
He did
Yeah, a
Colbert,
lot
and
of
he's like,
TV interviews
my
and,
words
yeah.
in this book are more important than the spin that's going to get put on them. And he was putting that out front. And I'm like, that goes hand in hand with what Kris was saying here. You know how hard it is to get anybody to talk.
So it goes.
Thank you, Kris Engelhardt.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We hope
Yeah.
to have you back for
Always
another
a pleasure.
round and hearing what you're
For
up to
another
next,
book.
please. Yeah. Please.
Shame on you.
One more to our chef, writer extraordinaire out of Bay City,
I'm gonna
Michigan.
ride my poor old back to the door. Oh, one more. Come on.
Thank you, Kris.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, appreciate you, brother.
All right.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, brought to you by Michigan Rock and Roll Legends, located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of the hosts, Gary, Dr. J. Johnson, Sir Fred Rife, archivist and videographer Mike Beatty, and myself, this podcast wouldn't be here without Studio 163's Alan Garcia, the voice of MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, all of our guests, and you, the listeners.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989. From all of us at the podcast, we want to thank you for tuning in.
Kris, what is that? It was on, I may still have it. It was a clear album, clear vinyl. And it was a reggae. And it's on Paul McCartney's label.
Oh, yes.
Greyhound or
Yes,
something?
yes. It was a reggae. It was on the MPL label. You're right.
Right.
You're right. It was a 12-inch vinyl single, I
Right.
believe.
Yeah,
It was on
I
clear
think I
vinyl.
still
Very
have it.
good, Fred.
Huh?
I could look that up. I don't remember. It was a band that was signed to his record label. He didn't have any direct
Okay.
contribution to the recording that I've ever been able to determine.
Yeah, I had that record
Yeah.
a long time, and then I
Yeah.
finally looked, and it said
MPL.
MPL, and I went, what?
Yeah.
Dang. How old is that one?
Oh, late 70s maybe.
Oh,
early
really?
80s,
Yeah.
somewhere in there.
McCartney was going up against Island Records at that point, huh?
Well, he was big into reggae.
Yeah.
Huge into reggae.
Wow. Fantastic.
Kris,
Yeah, that's what it
did
said.
you know Tom Smith?
Yes.
How about the gal that was his partner in Tomcat? Is it Cher Ferrio or
Yeah. I knew Cheryl.
it's Cheryl
Yeah.
Ferrio?
Yeah.
Is she around at all?
You know who would know that would be Pete Woodman.
Who?
Cheryl Ferrio.
The name it doesn't ring a bell.
She was around in bands locally. I think she was from Auburn originally.
Okay.
And
We just had Pete on
blonde
the show.
hair, as I recall.
I never saw
Yeah,
her.
she was about my age. And she was a singer in some bands locally. I think she hung with Wagner and Woodman and that crowd and
Okay.
Meatloaf.
Well, when she was with Tom Smith, they formed some sort of
Yeah,
association
and
with Harry Chapin.
also with what was his name? Oh, he went to Garber. He was in a band. Yeah, I knew Cheryl. I have no idea if she's alive or around or
You on those?
Susie Woodman might know.
I found another book at a thrift shop called, and I'm going to put that on my card because this is what I do, Vinyl Detective.
Yeah.
And there's a whole series of books of this
there you
vinyl.
go.
He goes all over the world. He gets paid to find a certain record.
For royalties or for
Yeah, well, for no, somebody's. A
That's
record
Mike's
collector
brother.
just sends
Mike's
them
older
out?
brother.
Yeah.
pays for all the transportation
Wow.
and everything. And I thought,
Mike's like, I'm
What a job.
trying to keep it away
Yeah.
I'm
from
going to put that on my card.
I'll take that gig.
Start advertising in television.
That's a great gig.
Yeah. I tell you the book that I'm really interested in that just came out is the Chuck Berry bio. Have you read any reviews of that yet?
No.
No.
Oh, talk about an interesting life.
Oh, yeah. He was interesting for 10 minutes backstage.
No.
Well, I told this story many times, but 1972 at the when I booked Lightning Slim in Europe, our first gig was at a festival in Coventry, England, and Chuck Berry was on it. And Lightning wanted to meet Chuck Berry. So I took Lightning and we went and I knocked on Chuck Berry's door, and he came to the door. And I said, before I had the chance to say anything, he slammed it.
Or what the fuck do you want?
Wow.
But I didn't. Lightning Slim was right behind me.
Should have let him do it.
He's a big guy, too.
That's the weekend that he recorded My Ding-a-Ling. His biggest probably selling record.
Yeah. Probably
without
was.
a doubt, it's the only number one. That's
And Lightning
shameful.
does that song. And I have to look again. I'm glad I reminded myself. Who wrote that song?
Was it Dave Bartholomew?
I think it is.
He did the original
I think
song,
it is.
I believe.
But Chuck changed the lyrics.
Because Lightning was doing it before I heard Chuck Berry.
Yeah, I've never heard Dave Bartholomew's version, so I'm not.
I haven't either.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
And I think he did write it.
yeah.
There was a manager for Chuck Berry when I met him. His name was J. Bird, John Bird. He was out of Miami, and he managed Chuck. And Chuck was out at Soaring Eagle. And I said, "Can you arrange for me to get backstage to meet and interview Chuck? I got a chapter on him in my book. I want to talk to him about when he did the Mike Douglas thing with John Lennon."
Mm-hmm.
He says, "You don't want to meet Chuck." I said, "Why?" He says, "You don't want to meet Chuck. He's not a very nice guy." I said, "I'll take my chances." He says, "I'll see what I can do." So he finally called me back. He says, "I got you back 2 tickets and backstage with Chuck." He says, "Good luck." He was as nice as could be. I was shocked. I was
Having a good day.
I was ready for loaded for bear, and I thought this is not going to be.
Well, you saw the two sides. So Fred saw one side, you saw the other.
He was actually very, very nice, and
Was he old back then?
Well, this was probably 20 years ago, maybe.
Oh, okay.
Big guy. I was shocked. He's tall.
Yeah.
He's a big guy. And
I saw that documentary where he gets paid in cash.
yep,
Oh, with
in a
Keith Richards and them?
suitcase.
Yeah.
yeah, that was true
And
all
then
along.
he only brings his guitar.
One step ahead of the IRS. He never paid a dime in taxes on any of that money. And he'd hire pickup bands because he knew they all knew his songs. He'd pay them a little paltry sum.
Well,
When
but he really lucked into having the Woolies
Yeah.
sit in for a band one night, and
Well, that
those
was
guys are
that
really
was
good.
his band in Michigan.
Oh yeah, he would hire the Woolies
Midwest.
anytime he came to Michigan if they were available.
But he was nice. He said, "John Lennon was a great guy. We really got on. He was wonderful. I had fun doing that show." He says, "But I don't know what he saw in that Japanese bitch."
Oh,
There
that's
you
hard.
go.
In the 90s, there was some videos going. Oh, you two did win a Kennedy Award. I didn't see that the other night, but they did win one.
Oh,
yeah.
the
Yeah,
band.
well,
I thought you meant
I thought you said YouTube.
Yeah,
I
that's what
did.
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube.
Close.
But they came to our gig once when somebody said, what's his name?
Bono?
Bono and the guitar player.
The
What's his
Edge.
The
name?
Edge.
The Edge are here. And we all went, who are they? It was right when they were starting out or something.
That's when I met him.
You met him in Lansing, right?
Yeah, at
Yeah.
Sully's. Yeah.
Oh, really? It's Sully's?
Yeah.
No
They
kidding.
used to call Bono Huey. That was his nickname. His
Okay.
real name's Paul Hewson. They
Yeah.
just called him Huey. And one of the guys in the band wasn't old enough to drink, and they played in a basement in a bar in East Lansing called Sully's.
Oh, really?
The opening act-
Sully's in Dearborn.
Yeah, the opening act was a Tejano band, a Mexican band, and the place was packed with all these Mexicans. And the minute the Mexican band was done, the place emptied out, and there were about 15 people left in the bar to see you too. They played to like 15 people. To add my camera with me, I got some great photos.
The 80,
Close as I
81,
am to you, I was to Bono.
80, 81,
80.
80.
80.
That's the first American tour then.
Fall of 80.
80.
Fall of 80.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yep.
Oh, such a fascinating story.
And after the show, they were bummed because there was nobody there. And I sat down with them and I said, man, I saw you guys at Harpo's 6 months earlier. And I said, you blew me away. And I had to see you again. I said, I'm just going to tell you, I saw the Beatles twice when I was 14 years old at Olympia Stadium in Detroit. I said, you guys are going to be as big as the Beatles. And I remember Bono, and I bought him a bottle of champagne, of Corbel Natural champagne that we shared, and they had to card the one kid, the drummer, wasn't old.
Larry Mulholland Jr.?
Yeah, he wasn't old enough to drink. That's how young these guys were. And I said to them, you guys are going to be as big as the Beatles. You got Stardust on you. And Bono turned to the edge and said, he's bloody fucking mental.
I'm reading his book right now. It's a great
2 years
book.
later, they were selling out Joe Louis Arena in Detroit.
Well, this Daniel O'Connell, the guy that I booked, he played bass and sang for a band called Beruga Bandit. Do you remember them, Fred?
That's
No, you just mentioned them the other night, or somebody mentioned
Yeah,
that
well,
band.
anyways, they were signed to Capitol, put out an album, and
Oh, you sent the email to us that you got that person.
and according to the story, we'll have to ask him a little bit more about this. They were playing in Boston, and the opening band was U2. Now, this is probably after, when the buzz started building on these guys. And so they opened the first night for Beruga Bandit. The place was packed. And after U2 played, everybody left. It was all people that were there because of the buzz.
yeah.
To see this.
That's the way it
opening
was at
band.
Harpo's.
Yeah, and they had no interest in the
Yeah,
headliner,
anybody
Beruga
else. Yeah,
Bandit.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of the reverse for them at Sully's. But
Well, they were booked for 4 nights. In the next 3 nights, they switched it. Beruga Bandit opened for U2.
Wow.
my son has a video when
Jeez.
U2 played Spartan Stadium in Lansing some years ago. My son has a video. He says, Dad, you got to see this. He says, Bono's talking about Sully's in Lansing. He was on stage and he says, we played this town in a little bar, and he mentioned the guy, an Irish guy that had
Yeah,
a bar
okay.
called Sully's. And Charlie says, Dad, he says, I remember you telling me this story.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool.
But he mentioned it on stage when they played it in East Lansing. At
That is amazing.
Spartan Stadium.
So, how big a place was this, if they had a
Small.
crowd?
It was in a basement.
Yeah, so
There was
you-
an upstairs and a downstairs.
probably
Maybe
couldn't-
seat 100 people, 150.
Kind of like
people.
old
Yeah,
Rick's used to be.
Yeah.
Rick's had an upstairs and a downstairs. Yeah.
yeah, long, narrow basement.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
Poles. You're walking around poles, holding
Yeah.
up the.
It was in a bar at one end and
Yep.
stage and seating.
Seen many shows at Rick's and
Me too. I seen Mule there.
You know,
Yeah,
played
very
there.
similar to Rick's.
We played there
Very
many
similar.
times. There and Lansing.
there's a scene like that in Bay City right now. Miles Brasnowski,
You were saying
the
that.
artist that he hung everything at the museum for the project, and he's got a gallery. It's called, what the heck is the name of
You're
that?
talking about Gonnell?
No,
Richard?
no,
No.
this is Miles Brasnowski.
Oh,
It's called the art shop or the art class or something. But anyways, it's a long, narrow. It's where the old cafe was back in the day, and upstairs was Mickey's Big Bot Teen Club on the west side. Anyways, this gallery is where that restaurant was, and they've got this basement, and they are getting a lot of young kids coming down,
Good.
either playing hard rock or a lot of rap, really popular.
Well,
And that gives them a place, and probably could, maybe I'm guessing from what I could visualize from being in the gallery, I don't think you could get more than 100 in there. But it's kind of big.
Have you been there yet?
No.
Okay.
No. Of course, if I walk in,
Where is it?
They're going to think I'm somebody's grandfather.
Where is it?
It's on Midland. Do you remember where the old Lucky's record store was?
Yeah.
On Midland?
Yeah.
There was 3 of them. This would have been the first one. It was much smaller.
But they were all on the north side of Midland, right? On the
Yes.
north side of the street.
Yeah, right.
And that second block.
Well, this would have been the first block. This is where this one was located.
To the west?
Well, toward the river.
Oh, okay.
East.
All right,
Okay,
east.
so then,
Where
yeah,
the sidewalk is up high.
Yeah,
Where
we're
the bookstore is like.
it's farther on.
Oh.
Now.
But it's on Midland Street.
Yeah.
Okay.
cool.
So I don't know if they've got it regularly scheduled. How
I wanna
exactly
get
they
tapped
do it, if
into
it's
that.
all just word of mouth.
I actually cooked food for one night for all of Queen. And the reason that I knew is because when I saw the order, it was totally out of left field. And the wine list was like $3,000 then, what they ordered off of. This is back in the mid-'70s. They're ordering Chateau Petrus, Magnums, and Mounton and Lafite. And I'm going, who the hell is out on that table? This is some group that just plays